You're standing at the edge of a tree line, and the thing in your hand is heavier than it looks, longer than you are tall. You've spent days on it, scraping, shaving, hardening the point in the coals of a fire until the tip is hard as bone. You balance it across one finger, and it tips forward, because whoever taught you this knew exactly where the weight should sit. This is a spear, and it is, as far as we can tell, one of the first real weapons any human being ever made. Now here's the part that should stop you cold. For a long time, everyone assumed a weapon like this was invented for one obvious reason: to bring down animals, to feed people, to hunt. But the deeper archaeologists dig, the more they keep finding the same unsettling thing. The oldest weapons on Earth aren't only buried next to dead horses and dead deer. Some of them are buried in dead people. So who made the first weapon, and who did they really use it on? The answer is older and darker than the story we usually tell about where we came from. Let's start with the spears themselves, because they are far, far older than most people ever guess. In the 1990s, in an open-pit coal mine near the town of Schöningen, in Germany, a researcher named Hartmut Thieme was carefully working through waterlogged, black lakeside mud. Most things rot away in a few thousand years, wood especially. It decays, it crumbles, it vanishes. But that mud had sealed itself shut like a time capsule. No oxygen, no rot. And out of it, Thieme pulled something almost nobody believed could still exist: wooden spears. Whole ones, at least 10 of them, some nearly 7 feet long, carved from the trunks of spruce and pine. And they were old, not thousands of years old, roughly 300,000 years old. Sit with that number, because it's almost impossible to feel. 300,000 years. Our own species, Homo sapiens, is only about 300,000 years old ourselves. These spears weren't even made by us. They were made by an earlier kind of human, before our species had finished becoming us. And these weren't crude sharpened sticks. Whoever made them understood engineering they had never been taught in any school. The thickest, heaviest part of each spear sits about a third of the way down from the tip, exactly where the weight sits on a modern competition javelin. They were balanced to fly. Someone, 300,000 years ago, had solved a physics problem with their hands and their eyes, and a lifetime of practice, and passed the solution down through generations. So already the first thing the weapon tells us is this: these primitive people were not stumbling around. They were planners, and you don't build a fleet of matched, balanced throwing spears by accident. So what were the Schöningen spears for? On that, the dirt is blunt. Scattered through the same mud, right alongside the weapons, were the bones of around 20 wild horses, butchered, cut-marked, cracked open for the marrow inside. This was a killing site, a place where a group of humans, working together, drove horses toward the water's edge and speared them down, over, and carved them up on the spot. And this changes the picture of these ancient people completely. To ambush a herd of powerful animals, you need more than a sharp stick. You need a plan. You need people who can stay silent, spread out, move on a signal, trust each other completely. You need language, or something very close to it. You need to trust that the person to your left will not run when the horse turns. The first weapon, in other words, wasn't just a tool. It was a social contract. It only worked if the group worked. The spear didn't just make one man deadlier. It bound a band of humans into a single hunting animal, more dangerous than anything with claws. And then there's the stone. Wood rots, so wooden spears almost never survive. But there was another leap, and this one left harder evidence. At some point, humans figured out that a spear tipped with stone was a different order of deadly. A fire-hardened wooden point can bruise and puncture. A worked stone point slices. It opens wounds that don't close, and to attach a stone point to a wooden shaft, a trick called hafting, you have to combine materials, bind them, sometimes glue them with tree resin, and cook that glue to just the right temperature. It's one of the earliest examples of a human making a tool out of parts. At a site called Kathupan in South Africa, archaeologists have found stone points that show the telltale wear of being fixed to a shaft and thrust into flesh. They're around 500,000 years old, older than the wooden spears, older than our species by a wide margin. So the timeline is settling into place, long before there were cities, before farming, before writing, before us, our ancestors had crossed a line. They had turned the world's materials into things designed, from the ground up to punch through a living body. And here is the question that hangs over all of it, the one everyone quietly hopes has a comfortable answer. When these people picked up their beautiful, balanced, stone-tipped spears, did they only ever point them at animals? Because when you look closely at the oldest human remains we have, that comfortable answer starts to fall apart. In the mountains of northern Spain, there's a site with a name that tells you what's in it. Cima de los Huesos, the Pit of Bones. It's a deep shaft at the bottom of a cave system, and packed into it are the remains of at least 28 ancient humans, again around 400,000 years old. One of them is a skull the researchers simply call Cranium 17, and when a team led by the scientist Nohemi Sala reconstructed it, piece by piece, they found something they could not explain away. High on the forehead, above the left eye, were two holes, two penetrating wounds, right next to each other. And when Sala's team studied the shape and angle, they realized the two holes had almost identical outlines, as if made by the same object, striking twice, from slightly different angles. A single accidental fall doesn't do that. A rock tumbling onto a head doesn't do that. Two nearly identical impacts, delivered face to face, points to one thing. Someone stood in front of this person and hit them, hard, twice, in the head. Then, it seems, the body was dropped down the shaft into the pit. The researchers called it what it was, the earliest known case of murder in the human story. 400,000 years ago, before our species existed, one human deliberately killed another. The very same skill that let them plan a hunt, let them plan a killing. It doesn't stop there. Remember the spear. In Schöningen cave in Iraq, among the Neanderthal skeletons found there, is a man the scientists call Schöningen 3. In one of his ribs there is a deep, sharp cut, a groove sliced partway through the bone by a thin, hard blade coming in from the front and above. It had begun to heal, which means he survived it for a few weeks before he died. Researchers who ran the experiments think the most likely cause is a thrown or thrust projectile, a weapon, driven into his chest. 50,000 years ago, in a cave, one human put a point through another human's ribs. And every time we find one of these, the same realization lands a little harder. The weapon and the wound were never separate inventions. From almost the very beginning, the tool that fed us was also the tool we turned on each other. But nothing prepared archaeologists for what they found on the shore of an old, dried lake in Kenya. The place is called Nataruk, near Lake Turkana. Around 10,000 years ago, it was a lush lagoon. And there, a team led by Marta Mirason Lar uncovered the skeletons of 27 people, men, women, and children, lying where they fell. They had not been buried. There was no grave, no ceremony, no careful arrangement. They were simply left in the mud, at the edge of the water. And their bones told a single, brutal story. One woman was in the last weeks of pregnancy. The bones of her unborn child were still inside her. The position of her hands and feet suggests they may have been bound. Skulls were caved in by blunt weapons, clubs. Hands were smashed. And embedded in the bone of several of them were sharp points made of obsidian, a black volcanic glass, the razor tips of arrows and spears, snapped off inside the bodies they killed. Obsidian, by the way, wasn't even common in that area, which hints that at least some of the attackers came from somewhere else. This wasn't one person snapping in a moment of rage. This was a group of humans, armed and organized, who walked up to another group of humans and slaughtered every one of them, including a pregnant woman and small children, and then walked away. Nataruk is one of the oldest scenes of human warfare we have ever found. Not a murder, not a fight, a massacre. 10,000 years ago, before armies, before nations, before kings, the weapon had already become the thing we do this with. And this is where the whole story turns over. We like to imagine that violence is a corruption, that somewhere back in the innocent past there was a peaceful ape, and that weapons, war, and cruelty are things that came later, once we got civilized and greedy and complicated. We tell ourselves that the spear was invented to feed the family, and that using it on a neighbor was a fall from grace that happened much later. But look at the actual evidence in the ground, and the two things arrive together. The oldest weapons we can find, and the oldest wounds we can find, sit in the same layers of the same earth. The murdered skull is as old as the hunting spear. The technology and the violence were not centuries apart. They were born as twins. Because here is the uncomfortable truth about every weapon ever made. A spear that can drop a horse can drop a man. A point that opens an animal opens a person just as easily. There is no such thing as a weapon that only kills what you want it to. Every single one is dual use. The moment our ancestors invented a tool good enough to kill the thing that could kill them, they also, in the very same instant, invented the tool to kill each other. We didn't lose our innocence somewhere along the way. Look honestly at the bones, and it isn't clear we ever had it. The same brilliant, cooperative, planning mind that made us the most successful animal on the planet is the mind that figured out, very early, how to end its own kind on purpose. So think, for a second, about the phone in your hand, the car in your driveway, the code running quietly on a screen somewhere far away. Almost everything we build carries this same shadow. The engine that moves the ambulance moves the tank. The chemistry that feeds billions makes the explosive. The network that connects the whole world can also aim it. We never left the tree line. We just got better at carving. The first weapon proved something about us that we have spent the rest of history trying not to look at. That our genius and our violence come from the exact same place. That they always have, and that we have never once managed to invent one without the other. So here's the question worth sitting with. If the very first thing that made us powerful was also the first thing we used to destroy ourselves, then after 300,000 years of practice, what, honestly, do you think we're getting better at?